Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and ladies and gentlemen of the House. You know, I've sat here and I've listened and I talked to some of the authors and some of the speakers on this bill. And I know that they believe in what they say, that they think that they can raise revenue and that would be a deterrent to speaking. And that would be a deterrent. But I want to tell you the real world of what we're doing here. All this is a fee increase that is, in fact, a tax increase. That's exactly what it is. There's only, as you look through the bill, for those of you who aren't familiar with motor vehicle legislation and traffic law violation, a lot of words in this bill and a lot of things that most of y'all don't know what it says because it refers back to other code sections. But this bill only does, this 10-page bill only does two things. First, through most of this bill, it raises reinstatement fees. Reinstatement fees, those are the fees that we categorically years ago had determined is what it would cost the state to administer the reissuance and administration of licenses and those fines and violations. And it's been $210. Now that multiplies on subsequent violations, but that's $210. It's not just DUIs, it's points violations, it's all other types, lapse of insurance. So this is basically a fee bill. It's raising money, and don't fool yourself into thinking it's anything else. At the end of the bill, when you get to Section 3, this is a super speeder. And, you know, I've thought about it, and, you know, we all know we're all violators. You know, we violate all kind of laws, especially traffic laws. And we know that speed kills. Truth is, you can't help it in a lot of cases. If you're coming into Atlanta, Georgia on a Monday morning, if you're not keeping up with the flow of traffic and it might be 85, it may be 90 miles an hour, you're going to get run over in a lot of cases. And I want to say what my friend from Hall County, wherever he's at, Mr. Holt, he told the exact truth. He said the most truthful thing, factually truthful thing that's been said today. Fines and revenues, they don't slow you down. What slows you down is when you see a trooper or a county deputy on the side of that road shooting radar. As I come up and down 85 going back and forth, excuse me, there he is over there. When I come back and forth and down 85 over in the little community of Brazelton, up the interstate a piece, they know just to take an empty county car and they park it at the intersection of an entrance ramp, because every time you slow it down right there. That's what enforces the laws. That's what slows people down. Now I want to tell you, and over the years, I know a little bit about this subject matter because I've sat on the Motor Vehicle Committee for right at 20 years. So the committee I was on years ago wrote most of these laws. And you've heard me say this on other bills this year and last year. At what point does the public policy of the state become skewed, in my opinion? Is when you start passing bills for the sake of revenue as opposed to the sake of doing what's right. The first 9 pages to 8 pages of this bill is nothing more than revenue generators. Well, I want to tell you about those revenue generators first, ladies and gentlemen. One of the biggest problems that we have in this state is the fact that we have so many unlicensed drivers on the road. And you'd probably be shocked to know how many of your friends and acquaintances and supporters are unlicensed drivers. Because quite honestly, they can't afford to pay the reinstatement, because by the time they have paid the fines, they paid the surcharges, and then to go through the process of going to driver improvement schools and such, then they're sitting there looking at a 210, sometimes multiple fees to get a license reinstated. And in this economy, believe it or not, ladies and gentlemen, there's people who can't afford to pay these. Then when you get into this other section, the super speeder fine, my real problem with that, ladies and gentlemen, if you want to raise the fine for the speeding violation, then raise the fine. But I believe that for every bill that's passed, a lot of times there's unintended consequences. And I want to tell you what some of the unintended consequences are going to be. And I want you to refer to this sheet that the gentleman from Peachtree City put out. I want you to read his sheet very carefully. And if you look through it, I mean, it's well put together. But it points out even more the problems and my concerns to that. The first one, will judges and law enforcement retain discretion to lower speeding tickets? Yes, sir. They certainly will. Certainly will. For those responsible people out here that has been concerned about DUIs over the years, one of the biggest and the most growing concern that I have that across the length and the breadth of this state is that we have jurisdictions and judges who are lowering DUI penalties to another charge of reckless driving. And you know why they're doing it? Because they know the ruination that casual DUI might cause someone, that they can't afford to pay it. They can't afford it on their record. But that's what's happening. So when you start doing these things, yes, in fact, you're giving them jurisdictions. Not to be surprised that a lot of your law enforcement officers in this state look a little bit the other way when it comes to certain offenses, because they have to live too. Your state law enforcement officers in this state have received little, if any, pay increases over the last 3 or 4 years. And they know what hard times is. So yes, they're human also. But the message that we're sending in a change in public policy, ladies and gentlemen, under this bill, is that it's all about the money. It's all about the money. And at what point does a fee become a tax? It's in this very thing that you're seeing. There's a second part. I want you to go down about 5 items down on this super speeder bill. And I want you to look at something. I want you to read it very carefully. Why aren't these penalties going to be collected through the courts? And if you look down, and it says penalties are directly related to driving privileges. Therefore, DDS is the appropriate source to leverage such fines. So now we're moving it out of the courts of jurisdiction and we're moving it to bureaucratic agencies, ladies and gentlemen, freely admitting that they need to be collecting fines. That's not the duty of government agencies. That's the duty of courts, ladies and gentlemen. So I would say in this, think about these unintended consequences. If you're one who has concerns about raising fees and fees becoming fines or fees becoming taxes, yeah, you got a reason to vote against it. If you're concerned about the unintended consequences, ladies and gentlemen, then you've got good reason to be concerned, because it changes the whole system that historically this legislative body and the General Assembly of Georgia has always prompted. And that's that if you violate if you have a traffic violation and you violate the law, then it should be a fair and an equal pay. It should be a fine at that point. And that fines should not be used as revenue generators. Because when you start that public policy that law enforcement and fines are based on revenue brought in, then you are diminishing what each of those institutions are about. I would ask you to seriously consider this. If you think that you want to do something to lower the speeding in this state, then I would encourage you to put a priority in the state budget and start putting back some of those troopers back on the road. I would encourage you to do a lot of things. I'd encourage you to, say, put governors on cars if that's what you want, to limit the speed. But just doing this is going to have some unintended consequences. And probably the one that I fear the worst is the volumes of numerous people who will not be able to get their license back because they quite honestly can't afford it. So then they're going to continue to go to their job. They're going to continue to take their children to school, but they're going to be doing it without a driver's license. So we're thus further criminalizing it. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and ladies and gentlemen.
You wish to yield for questions?
Sure. I'm up for confrontation this morning.
Well, I'm going to try to keep the confrontation to a minimum. Representative Hatfield has a question to your right.
Will the gentleman yield?
Certainly.